Commander Lee Hannah pressed her face against the cold metal of the observation window. Her breath fogged the glass as she watched the terrible scene unfold on the planet below. The mining colony looked so small from up here, just a cluster of silver domes scattered across the red desert surface. But she could see the dark shapes moving between the buildings like hungry shadows. The apex had come to collect. "Ma'am, should we move closer?" asked Lieutenant Park Min-ho. His young face was pale as he stared at the readings on his screen. The energy signatures were off the charts. "No," Hannah said quietly. "We stay here and we watch. It's all we're allowed to do." For she hated those words. 43 years old, 20 years in the Terran Defense Corps, and she was still just watching while her own species suffered. The year was 2387, and humanity had been part of the Galactic Confederation for over a century. It should have been humanity's golden age among the stars. Instead, it was barely better than slavery. The galaxy had rules, simple rules that everyone understood. The stronger your mind, the higher you ranked. The apex sat at the very top because they were pure energy, pure thought. They had evolved beyond physical bodies millions of years ago. Below them came the other alien races, ranked by how powerful their psychic abilities were. And at the very bottom, barely worth counting, were the humans. Humans with their weak minds and primitive emotions. Humans who could barely send a telepathic message across a room. Humans who were good for only one thing: manual labor in the dangerous places where the higher races didn't want to go. "Energy spike detected," Min-ho reported. His voice cracked a little dot down on the colony. The apex enforcers were making their presence known. Hannah could see them now through the ship's powerful cameras. They looked like living lightning, tall figures made of crackling white energy that moved without touching the ground. Where they walked, the very air seemed to burn. The colonists were running, but not very far. They couldn't run far because the apex wouldn't let them. Hannah watched as one by one, the miners stopped moving. They just froze in place like broken toys, their arms hanging at their sides, their faces blank and empty. Psychic domination. The apex could take control of any mind weaker than theirs, which meant they could control almost everyone in the galaxy whenever they wanted to. "Why did they come here?" Min-ho whispered. The colony report said they were just mining basic metals. Pulled up the geological surveys on her tablet. Her eyes widened as she read. Quantum crystals. The miners found quantum crystals yesterday. That explained everything. Quantum crystals were the most valuable substance in the galaxy. They powered faster-than-light engines and psychic amplifiers. By Confederation law, any discovery of quantum crystals automatically belonged to the apex. It didn't matter who found them or where they were found. The apex had first claim to everything valuable in the galaxy. On the surface, the colonists were being herded into the main square. Men and women who had been laughing and working just hours ago now stood like statues, their minds locked away behind apex control. Hannah recognized some of the faces from her last inspection visit. Mrs. Bay, who made the best noodle soup on 3 planets. Engineer Nam, who always had a joke ready. Little Sujin, who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. All of them trapped inside their own heads, while the apex decided their fate. The lead enforcer, taller and brighter than the others, glided to the center of the square. When it spoke, its voice reached every mind on the planet at once. Colony leader Kim Dae. Step forward. Anna watched as a stocky man in mining coveralls walked stiffly toward the apex. She knew Kim Dae. He was a good man, fair leader who cared about his people. His movements were jerky and wrong, like a puppet being pulled by invisible strings. "You concealed the crystal discovery for 17 hours, the apex said. Its voice was like ice scraping against metal. You attempted to file false reports. You encouraged resistance to Confederation authority. Kim Dae tried to speak, but only strange choking sounds came out. The apex was squeezing his mind, digging through his thoughts like a surgeon with a knife. Your punishment will serve as education for the others. What happened next made Hannah look away from the screen.
Nice.
She had seen apex punishment before, but it never got easier to watch. Kim Dae's scream echoed across the colony as the enforcer began to systematically destroy his mind. Not kill him. that would be too quick. Instead, it slowly burned away his memories, his personality, everything. That made him human, leaving behind only an empty shell that could still feel pain. The other colonists were forced to watch. The Apex made sure of that, ma'am, Minho said softly. Request permission to intervene. Hannah's hand moved toward the weapons console, then stopped. She had seen this same scene on dozens of worlds, every time she wanted to fight. Every time. The answer was the same. Quest denied, came the cold voice from Confederation Command through the CUM system. Humans do not challenge the Apex. Maintain position and observe only. As Kim Day's broken body collapsed in the dust, and the Apex began loading the quantum crystals onto their energy ships, Hannah felt something hot and dangerous growing in her chest. Something that whispered that maybe, just maybe, it was time for humans to start challenging the Apex after all. But she pushed that feeling down deep where no one could see it. In the Confederation, dangerous thoughts could get you killed. For now, Dr. Choi Gi-won's hands shook as he stared at the microscope display for the 10th time that morning. The numbers couldn't be right. They just couldn't be. Every test he ran showed the same impossible result. The Apex weren't what they claimed to be. Research. Station Omega floated in the dark space between stars, far from prying eyes. Juan had been working here for 3 years, officially studying alien biology for the Confederation. But his real work happened in the hidden lab deep inside the station's core, where he kept samples that weren't supposed to exist. Apex tissue. Somehow, during a mining accident on Kepler 442, workers had found what looked like fossilized remains of an ancient Apex. The Confederation had covered it up immediately. But not before a few samples made their way to scientists like Ji-won, who asked too many questions. This can't be right, he muttered, running the genetic analysis one more time. His assistant, Dr. Song Rina, looked up from her own workstation across the small lab. What can't be right? She asked. Rina was young, maybe 25, with the kind of sharp mind that asked dangerous questions. That's why Gi-won had requested her for this project. Look at this DNA sequence, Ji-won said, transferring his data to her screen. This isn't natural evolution. These genetic markers, they're parasitic integration patterns. Rina frowned as she studied the data. Parasitic? You mean the Apex are some kind of parasite? Not some kind, Ji-won said quietly. The worst kind. Look here. He pointed to a section of the genetic code. This shows viral insertion patterns. The Apex didn't evolve into energy beings. It consumed another species and took over their bodies. Then they consumed those bodies too, leaving only the energy patterns behind. The implications hit them both at the same time. The rulers of the galaxy, the beings who claimed evolutionary superiority over all other life, were nothing but ancient parasites who had eaten their way to the top. How long ago? Rina whispered. Based on the decay patterns, maybe 50,000 years. They've been feeding on other species this entire time. Guan pulled up more data, and there's something else, something even more important. He showed her brain scan recordings from human soldiers who had survived Apex mental attacks. I've been studying these for months. Look at the psychic resistance patterns during combat. Rina studied the scans. The resistance spikes correlate with emotional intensity specifically. She paused, checking the data again. Fear doesn't help, either to sadness or despair, but anger. Anger makes us immune, Ji-won finished. When a human gets angry enough, really furiously angry, the Apex can't touch their mind. I think it's because our emotions are too chaotic, too primitive for their parasitic psychic abilities to handle. They stared at each other across the lab. If this was true, if humans had a natural defense against Apex mind control, then everything could change. The entire power structure of the galaxy was built on the Apex's ability to dominate other minds. But humans, the lowliest species in the Confederation, might be the only ones who could resist them. We have to tell people, Rina said. We have to let everyone know what the Apex really are. Gi-won was already moving toward the communication console. I'm uploading everything to the quantum network. If we can get this information to the right people, Alarms suddenly screamed through the station. Red lights bathed the lab as the emergency systems activated. Through the small porthole, Giwan could see shapes moving in the darkness outside. Shapes that glowed with familiar white energy. "They know," he breathed. "They know what we found." The station shuddered as something massive struck the outer hull. The lights flickered and went out, leaving only the emergency power. In the red glow, Giwan frantically worked at the communication console, trying to upload his research before it was too late. "Giwan! Hurry!" Rena shouted over the noise of tearing metal. The apex were cutting through the station's walls like they were made of paper. His fingers flew over the controls, sending the data packet to every frequency he could access. One transmission locked onto a military vessel, the UES Dauntless, commanded by someone named Lee Hanna. If he was going to die, at least the truth would survive. The lab door exploded inward. 3 Apex enforcers flowed into the room like liquid. Lightning, their energy forms crackling with deadly power. "Ah!" Rena screamed and tried to run, but a tendril of pure energy pierced her chest. She collapsed without another sound. Giwan felt the familiar pressure in his head as the lead Apex tried to paralyze his mind. But as he watched Rena's lifeless body hit the floor, something hot and fierce ignited in his chest. Rage. Pure. Burning. Rage at the injustice of it all. The psychic pressure vanished. "Impossible," the Apex hissed, its voice like breaking glass. "Your mind should be ours." "You're afraid," Giwan snarled, standing up straighter than he had in years. "That's why you're here. You're afraid the galaxy will learn what you really are. Parasites. Ancient, cowardly parasites who can only survive by feeding on others." The Apex tried again to break his mind, sending waves of psychic force that should have driven him insane. But Giwan's anger burned too bright, too pure. He was immune, unable to control him, unable to break him. They did the only thing they could do. They killed him, but not before dragging him to the station's central plaza, where they executed him. In front of the cameras, for all the galaxy to see. They thought his death would serve as a warning. Instead, they had just created their first martyr. And somewhere in space, Commander Lee Hanna received a data packet that would change everything. Commander Lee Hanna sat alone in her quarters, staring at the encrypted data Dr. Choi had died to send her. The small storage device seemed to burn in her hands as she read through the files for the 100th time. Every word changed everything she thought she knew about the galaxy. The Apex were parasites. Ancient creatures who had devoured their original hosts and now fed on the minds of other species. But more importantly, they had a weakness. When humans got angry enough, truly furious, the Apex couldn't control their minds. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. "Lieutenant." Park Minho entered, followed by 3 other officers Hanna had carefully chosen over the past month. Captain Yoon Seokman commanded a patrol fleet near the Outer Rim colonies. Major Kong Minji led a special forces unit that had seen more combat than most. Engineer Oh Sun-woo worked on the deep space mining platforms, where strange things sometimes happened. "You all got my message," Hanna said, looking at each face in turn. "You're here because I think you've suspected the truth for a long time." Captain Yoon spoke first. "My crews have been reporting odd incidents for years. Times when Apex psychic attacks just stopped working. Always during combat when the soldiers were fighting to protect civilians." "Same here," Major Kong added. "I've lost count of how many times my people have shrugged off mind control during rescue operations. Command always writes it off as equipment malfunction." Engineer Sunwoo nodded slowly. "The mining crews talk about it too, when the Apex enforcers come to take their discoveries. Sometimes 1 or 2 workers stay conscious. Ones who are angriest about losing their family's future." Hanna activated the holographic display in the center of the room. Dr. Choi's research filled the air between them. Genetic sequences, brain scans, historical records that didn't match the official versions. "Dr. Choi died to get us this information," she said quietly. "The Apex aren't evolved beings. They're parasites who consumed their original species 50,000 years ago. And when humans experience strong enough emotions, especially protective anger, We become immune to their psychic control. The silence in the room was heavy. These were all experienced officers who had seen the worst of Apex rule. They understood what this meant. "What do you want us to do?" Captain Yoon asked. "We start small," Hannah said. "Rescue operations. We target Apex holding facilities and free the prisoners. We gather more evidence. And we find others who are ready to fight back." Over the following weeks, the resistance grew one person at a time. They were careful, selecting only those who had already shown signs of immunity or who had lost enough to the Apex to risk everything. A communications officer whose brother had been mind-wiped, a transport pilot whose daughter had been taken for psychic testing, a medic who had seen too many broken minds in Apex detention centers. Their first real operation was the rescue of prisoners from Kepler Station, a fortress-like facility where the Apex kept humans for experimentation. 12 volunteers approached the station in stolen maintenance ships, their hearts pounding with fear and determination. Remember, Hannah broadcast to the team as they prepared to breach the outer defenses. When the Apex try to control you, think about why we're here. Think about everyone they've hurt. Let that anger burn. The attack began at midnight station time. Major Kong's team cut through the hole, while Engineer Sunwoo disabled the security systems. Soon as they entered the facility, the Apex guards struck back with waves of psychic force designed to paralyze any intruder. But the humans kept moving. Their rage at what they found inside, rows of prisoners being slowly drained of their thoughts. Children being used as test subjects, entire families turned into mindless drones made them untouchable. Lieutenant Minho gasped over the comm as he watched an Apex enforcer's attack slide harmlessly off his mind. "I can feel them trying to get in, but the anger, it's like a wall." They freed over 200 prisoners that night. But more importantly, they discovered something that changed everything. When the human rescue team fought together, their combined emotions created what Dr. Lim Tae-yoon, their new chief scientist, called a psychic dead zone. The Apex couldn't control anyone within range of the angry humans. "We're not just immune," Dr. Lim explained during their next meeting. "When we work together, when we fight to protect others, we can shield entire groups from Apex influence. The emotional resonance spreads to other species." Word of the Kepler Station rescue spread through underground networks across human space. More officers joined them, or civilians offered support. Hit supply convoys carrying mind control equipment. They sabotaged broadcasting stations that spread Apex propaganda. They rescued scientists and historians who had been imprisoned for asking the wrong questions. Each success brought new recruits, not just humans, but aliens from other species who had suffered under Apex rule. The resistance cells grew from dozens to hundreds to thousands. They shared Dr. Choi's research, taught others about the immunity that anger could provide, and slowly built a network that spanned multiple star systems. But Hannah knew this was just the beginning. So far, they had only faced minor Apex enforcers and automated systems. The real challenge would come when the Apex Supreme Council decided humanity had become too dangerous to ignore as she stood on the bridge of her ship, now painted with the resistance symbol, a burning star breaking free from chains. Hannah felt the weight of what they were starting. They weren't just fighting for human freedom anymore. They were fighting to free the entire galaxy from parasites that had ruled through fear for 50,000 years. The underground was burning with hope and rage. Soon, that fire would spread to every corner of known space. The galaxy burned with revolution, and the Apex were done being patient. Commander Lee Hannah watched the tactical display with growing horror as reports flooded in from across human space. Dr. Choi's research had spread like wildfire through every communication network, reaching billions of beings on thousands of worlds. The truth about the Apex, that they were ancient parasites, not evolved gods, had shattered the foundations of Confederation rule. But the Apex response was swift and terrible. "Ma'am, we're getting distress calls from the Centauri colonies," reported Lieutenant Park Min-ho, his face pale as he read the incoming messages. The entire system just went dark. No communications, no life signs, nothing. Through the bridge windows of the Resistance flagship, Hannah could see the impossible sight unfolding in space around them. Massive forms were materializing out of nothing. Apex were entities that hadn't been seen for millions of years. They looked like living stars, each one the size of a battleship, crackling with energy that could burn planets to ash. Emergency broadcast from New Seoul, called out communications officer Kim Gina. They're saying the population just stopped moving. Everyone on the planet is standing perfectly still. Anna closed her eyes. She'd feared this might happen. The Apex weren't just using their normal enforcers anymore. The Supreme Council itself had awakened from whatever deep meditation they had been in for countless centuries, and they were using their full power to turn entire worlds into armies of mindless drones. "How many systems?" she asked quietly. 17. "So far," Minho replied, "and the number is growing every hour." The Apex had made their message clear. Through every communication channel in the galaxy, their ancient voices spoke in unison, burning through the minds of every sentient being. "Rebellion ends here. We are your evolution. We are your destiny. You have forgotten your place in the natural order. Submit now, or feed us in your death." Captain Yoon Siakman's fleet had been the first to encounter the awakened Apex directly. His final transmission still echoed in Hannah's memory. "They're too strong. We can't. They're taking control of my crew. The anger isn't enough anymore. They're just two." In silence, Major Kong Minji's ground forces were trapped on 3 different worlds as Apex warforms surrounded the planets. Her soldiers could resist individual enforcers, but these ancient beings were different. Their psychic power was so overwhelming that even furious humans could barely maintain their immunity. "Ma'am," Engineer Sunwoo called from his station. "Long-range sensors are detecting massive energy signatures converging on our position. At least 50 Apex entities, maybe more." Hannah looked at the display showing Proxima Station, their main base of operations. 5 million humans lived and worked here, along with refugees from a dozen alien species who had joined the resistance. It was the heart of everything they had built, and the Apex were coming to destroy it. "All ships, this is command." Hannah broadcast to the scattered resistance fleet. "Pull back to defensive positions around the station. We're going to make our stand here." But even as she gave the orders, she knew they were outmatched. Through the observation windows, she could see the Apex warforms approaching like a storm of living lightning. Each one pulsed with energy that made the air itself seem to scream. These weren't just enforcers or guards. These were the original Apex. The ones who had devoured entire species and ruled the galaxy for 50,000 years. The first attack came without warning. A beam of pure psychic force struck the station's outer ring, and every human inside that section simply stopped moving. Not dead, not unconscious, but completely under Apex control. They turned their weapons on their own friends and began firing. "Shield. Generators are failing," Sunwoo reported. "They're not using conventional weapons. Yet they're attacking our minds directly, turning our own people against us." More beams struck the station, watched in horror as sections full of resistance fighters suddenly switched sides, their faces blank and empty as they became Apex puppets. The fury that had protected them before seemed useless against this level of psychic assault. "We need to evacuate," Minho said desperately. "Get the civilians to the escape pods." "No," Hannah said firmly. "If we run now, the resistance dies. Human in the galaxy becomes a slave forever." She paused, watching as another Apex warform positioned itself directly in front of the station's main viewing portal. The ancient being was so massive it blocked out the stars, its energy form writhing. With hungry anticipation, "All resistance forces, this is Commander Hannah." She broadcast on all frequencies. "I know it looks impossible. I know they seem too strong. But remember why we started this fight. Remember Dr. Choi, who died to give us the truth? Remember every human who suffered under their rule. Remember that we are not just fighting for ourselves." The Apex entity outside the window began to glow brighter, preparing to feed on the millions of minds trapped inside the station. Its psychic roar echoed through space, a sound of pure hunger and ancient malice. "If we're going down," Hannah continued, her voice steady, despite the terror surrounding them, "we're going down fighting. We are human. We do not surrender, do not kneel, and we do not let others suffer while we can still stand." As the Apex closed in for the final kill, their forms blazing with the power to destroy worlds. Hannah realized something that made her smile, despite the hopelessness of their situation. The real fight was just beginning. Commander Lee Hannah's finger hovered over the final button, around Proxima Station. 50 Apex war forms waited like hungry predators, their ancient energy blazing with the promise of death. Inside the station, millions of humans and their alien allies prepared for what seemed like certain doom. But Hannah had one last card to play. Execute Protocol Defiance, she whispered into her communicator, across the entire galaxy. Every human ship, station, and colony received the same signal at exactly the same moment. Hidden transmitters that had been secretly installed over months of careful preparation suddenly activated. The quantum communication network that connected every world in Confederation space began to carry something it had never carried before: pure human emotion. Dr. Choi's research data flooded the networks. But it wasn't just information anymore. Every transmission was wrapped in the emotional recordings of human resistance fighters, the fury of parents whose children had been taken, the rage of workers whose discoveries had been stolen, the protective anger of soldiers who had watched their friends die. All of it compressed into a signal that could travel faster than light and burn through any psychic defense. The effect was immediate and devastating. On Centauri Prime, where the entire population had been turned into mindless drones just hours before, factory worker Next 7439 suddenly remembered his real name was Kelvik. The human-transmitted rage broke through the Apex mind control like a hammer through glass. Around him, millions of other aliens blinked in confusion as their thoughts became their own again. On the vegan trade routes, starship crews who had been flying in perfect formation under Apex control suddenly broke ranks. As their individual personalities reasserted themselves, the captain of the merchant vessel, Stellar Wind, looked around his bridge in shock, remembering for the first time in weeks that he had a family waiting for him at home. Species after species across the galaxy experienced the same awakening. The human gift of righteous anger, the emotion that could burn away any form of psychic domination, spread like wildfire through the communication networks. For the first time in 50,000 years, the galaxy began to remember what freedom felt like. The Apex Supreme Council, feeling their control slip away world by world, made a decision that would seal their fate. If they couldn't control the galaxy, they would destroy the source of the rebellion. Every remaining Apex entity began converging on one target: Earth. The ancient beings abandoned their positions across space, streaming toward humanity's homeworld like a river of deadly light. Their combined energy forms created a darkness that swallowed entire star systems as they passed. By the time they reached the Sol system, their collective power was enough to crack planets. But Earth was ready. Commander Hannah had made it home just in time. Her battered resistance fleet limping into Earth's orbital defense perimeter as the Apex army approached. The planet's surface was ablaze with activity as every human settlement prepared for the final battle. Orbital platforms that had been secretly under construction for months moved into position, their quantum crystal power cores humming with energy. "This is it," Hannah broadcast to the defense fleet. "Everything we've fought for comes down to this moment. Remember, we're not just fighting for Earth. We're fighting for every species in the galaxy that deserves to be free." The Apex attack began at dawn, Earth time. Beams of pure psychic energy lanced down from orbit, meant to paralyze every human mind on the planet. But something impossible happened. The beams struck the atmosphere and simply ... stopped the combined fury of 8 billion humans. All focused on protecting their home and their newfound galactic family, created a psychic barrier that even the Apex Supreme Council couldn't penetrate. The battle raged for 18 hours. Ancient Apex warforms that had destroyed entire civilizations found themselves matched by human pilots, whose protective instincts made them untouchable. Energy weapons that could melt asteroids struck defense shields powered by pure human determination and barely scratched them. Engineer Osunwu, commanding the orbital defense grid, watched in amazement as his readings showed the impossible. "The Apex power levels are dropping," he reported. They're actually getting weaker. Dr. Lim Taiyun, monitoring the psychic resonance from Earth's surface, understood what was happening. They're parasites, he explained over the communication network. They've been feeding on dominated minds for so long they've forgotten how to generate their own power, and they can't control anyone. They start to starve. The turning point came when the Apex Supreme Council, desperate and weakening, made one final assault on Earth's North American continent. Their combined psychic scream was meant to shatter every human mind on the planet. Instead, it met the collective rage of humanity's defenders and rebounded, striking the ancient beings like a physical blow. As the smoke cleared and the last Apex war form flickered and died in Earth's orbit, something unprecedented happened. The surviving Apex entities, weakened and confused, found themselves facing a choice they had never experienced before. Humanity offered them mercy. You can evolve, Hannah broadcast to the broken Supreme Council. You can learn to live without. Feeding on others will help you find a new way to exist, one that doesn't require you to destroy other species. Some of the Apex accepted. Others, unable to comprehend the concept of mercy, faded away rather than change their nature. Years later, as Captain Lee Hannah helped dedicate the new Galactic Council chambers, she reflected on what humanity had accomplished. They hadn't won through superior technology or overwhelming force. They had won by proving that the greatest strength wasn't the power to control others, but the courage to set them free. The galaxy burned with new hope, lit by the fire that Earth had delivered to the stars.